All right, folks, welcome back to Full Spectrum Frontiers. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and today we're diving into one of the most overlooked yet absolutely critical pieces of American national security, the Panama Canal. Yeah, I know. When people hear Panama Canal, they think about high school history class, some vague memory of Teddy Roosevelt waving a big stick, and maybe something about malaria. But let me tell you, this isn't just some old-world engineering marvel. The Panama Canal is the lifeline of global commerce, a strategic artery that keeps America's military and economy running. And yet, it's a choke point we don't fully control anymore, which should make you sit up a little straighter in your chair. Let's be real. Without the canal, our ability to project power, move goods, and maintain influence in the Western Hemisphere takes a serious hit. This isn't just about shipping lanes. It's about national security, economic resilience, and the growing influence of China in our own backyard. So today we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk about why the canal is still so damn important, not just for trade, but for military strategy and global stability. Then, we'll take a hard look at what happened when we handed it over to Panama in 1999 and how foreign players are stepping into the vacuum we left behind. And finally, we'll wrap up with the big question: what happens next? Should the U.S. just sit back and watch as its influence erodes? Or is there a way to secure this lifeline without causing an international meltdown? Before we dive in, do me a favor. If you're enjoying Full Spectrum Frontiers, hit that like button, share the episode, and leave a review. It helps more than you know, and it keeps this show growing so we can keep tackling the topics that actually matter. Now buckle up, because today we're peeling back the layers on the Panama Canal, what makes it so important, how we lost control of it, and what it means for the future of U.S. national security. Let's get into it. All right, let's start with the basics. Why does the Panama Canal still matter in 2025? I mean, we're living in an era of hypersonic missiles, AI-driven warfare, and global cyber conflicts, yet we're here talking about a 50-mile-long waterway that was built over a century ago. Sounds almost quaint, right? Wrong. The Panama Canal isn't just a historical marvel, it's a strategic necessity. It connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, slashing thousands of miles off shipping routes and allowing the U.S. to move military assets at a moment's notice. Without it, our Navy would be forced to take the long way around South America like some 19th century armada. That's not just inconvenient, it's a vulnerability. Economic lifeline of the Americas. Let's talk numbers. Around 5% of the world's trade passes through this canal every year, including roughly 40% of container traffic to and from the United States. That means everything from oil tankers to Amazon shipments relies on this stretch of water. If you're a business owner, a trucker, or just someone who likes ordering stuff online, the canal plays a bigger role in your life than you probably realized. But here's where things get tricky. The canal is now at risk of becoming a bottleneck instead of a gateway. Climate change, drought conditions, and increased demand have created a backlog of ships, delaying critical supplies and driving up costs. In 2023, Panama had to limit the number of ships passing through per day because of low water levels. And let's not forget security threats. This thing is a prime target for cyber attacks, sabotage, and geopolitical power plays. Now, the military angle. The U.S. has built its entire naval strategy around the ability to move forces quickly between oceans. The canal makes that possible. Think back to World War II. American aircraft carriers and battleships used the canal to reinforce the Pacific Fleet after Pearl Harbor. During the Cold War, it was the difference between keeping the Soviets guessing and giving them a clear path to outmaneuver us. Fast forward to today. The canal still plays a massive role in power projection. If the U.S. needed to shift forces quickly in response to a crisis in the South China Sea or the Arctic, the canal is the fastest way to do it. Without it, we're looking at a 14,000-mile detour around Cape Horn at the bottom of South America. That's weeks of travel time, fuel costs through the roof, and a tactical disadvantage we simply can't afford. And let's be honest, do you think China, Russia, or any of our adversaries would hesitate to exploit that kind of delay? Now here's where things start to get a little uncomfortable. In 1999, the U.S. formally handed over control of the Panama Canal to Panama under the Torrijos-Carter Treaty. This was supposed to be a diplomatic win, a way to show goodwill and improve relations with Latin America. The logic was that the U.S. didn't need to own the canal anymore. We just needed to keep it open and operational. Sounds reasonable, right? Except that's not how geopolitics works. Handing over control of the canal meant giving up a permanent U.S. military presence in one of the most strategically valuable regions in the world. And surprise, surprise, China saw the opportunity and moved in fast. China's quiet takeover. Today, Chinese state-backed companies control key ports on both ends of the canal. Think about that for a second. The U.S. built and controlled this vital trade artery for nearly a century, and now China is sitting at the gates, running logistics and infrastructure. This isn't some tinfoil hat conspiracy. It's a fact. China's Hutchison Whampoa, a company with deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party, operates port facilities at Balboa and Cristobal, two of the most crucial access points to the canal. This gives Beijing economic leverage over global trade and a potential stranglehold on a route the U.S. depends on for both commerce and military mobility. If tensions between the U.S. and China escalate, say, over Taiwan or the South China Sea, China could easily disrupt canal operations, delaying U.S. military deployments and crippling supply chains. This isn't just speculation. We've seen how China operates when it comes to economic coercion. They've done it with rare earth minerals. They've done it with semiconductors. And if they control enough influence over the Panama Canal, they could do it with global shipping routes. The bigger picture, a weakening U.S. presence in Latin America. And it's not just the canal. This is part of a bigger trend. China has been expanding its influence all over Latin America, signing infrastructure deals, offering massive loans, and securing access to critical resources. While the U.S. has been focused on the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific, China has been quietly locking down economic and diplomatic ties right in our own hemisphere. So the question becomes, what happens next? Should the U.S. reassert a stronger presence in Panama? Should we push back against Chinese influence? And most importantly, can we do it without triggering a full-blown diplomatic crisis? So, let's talk about the handover, the moment when the U.S. went from controlling one of the most strategic waterways in the world to, well, hoping everything works out. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Panama Canal belonged to the United States. It didn't. We built it, yes. We maintained it, sure. But technically, it was always Panamanian land. And after almost a century of U.S. control, the people of Panama wanted it back. That's understandable. National pride, sovereignty, all that good stuff. But here's where the problem starts. Just because something makes sense diplomatically doesn't mean it makes sense strategically. When President Jimmy Carter signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaty in 1977, setting up the transfer of the canal to Panama by the end of 1999, The assumption was that Panama could run it just fine on their own. The U.S. would still have access, we'd still have friendly relations, and most importantly, there would be no foreign interference. That was the deal. Yeah, about that. China moves in. Fast forward to today, and guess who's got their hands all over the canal? China. Let's be clear, China doesn't own the Panama Canal, but they might as well. They've been quietly expanding their influence over Panama's economy and, more importantly, its infrastructure. Hutchison Whampoa, a Chinese state-linked company, operates key ports at both ends of the canal, Balboa on the Pacific side and Cristobal on the Atlantic. This gives them a front-row seat to everything moving in and out of the canal. Chinese firms have invested billions into infrastructure projects, including logistics hubs, roads, and even a proposed fourth set of locks that would allow even larger ships to pass through. In 2017, Panama cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan and established formal relations with Beijing. And guess what? Right after that, China started negotiating even more deals in Panama, from trade agreements to tech infrastructure. Coincidence? Not a chance. Why this matters? China's growing presence in Panama isn't just about trade, it's about leverage. If Beijing ever wanted to pressure the U.S., controlling key access points to global supply chains would be a hell of a way to do it. We've already seen China play economic hardball with rare earth minerals, energy, and even Hollywood. You think they wouldn't do it with a strategic canal? Let's say tensions over Taiwan hit a boiling point. The U.S. decides to send a fleet into the Pacific to deter Chinese aggression. Now imagine delays at the Panama Canal, mysteriously long inspection times, technical difficulties, or an outright refusal to allow U.S. military vessels through. Suddenly, that rapid force projection the U.S. relies on isn't so rapid anymore. And let's not forget cyber threats. China has already hacked U.S. critical infrastructure, infiltrated supply chains, and stolen industrial secrets. What happens if they get access to canal control systems? A cyber attack targeting shipping routes or infrastructure could throw global trade into chaos overnight. Panama's role, independent or influenced? Now, to be fair, Panama insists that they're an independent nation making their own decisions, and I believe that to a point. But when a country like China pours billions into your infrastructure, builds your ports, and dangles economic deals in front of you, it's hard to say no when they come knocking. Panama is in a tough spot. On one hand, they benefit from Chinese investment. On the other, they know the U.S. is watching closely. It's a balancing act, and so far, Panama has been trying to play both sides. But here's the thing. History tells us that when smaller nations try to play great powers against each other, it usually doesn't end well for them. So where does this leave the U.S.? What are the options? Do we just sit back and let China solidify control, or is there a way to reassert influence without making a mess of things? So, where does this leave us? The Panama Canal is still one of the most strategically important pieces of infrastructure on the planet, and right now, the U.S. doesn't have nearly as much influence over it as it should. We built it, we ran it, and then we walked away, while China saw an opening and moved in. The reality is, this isn't just about a waterway. It's about geopolitical influence, military mobility, and economic security. The canal is a choke point, and whoever controls choke points controls the flow of power. That's been true for centuries, and it's true now. The U.S. can't afford to sit back and hope for the best. Whether it's through economic incentives, a renewed military presence, or straight up pushing back against China, something needs to be done. Otherwise, we risk waking up one day and realizing that one of our biggest strategic advantages has been completely neutralized, not by force, but by sheer neglect. Now, here's the part nobody in Washington wants to talk about. What happens if we do nothing? China keeps expanding its influence, solidifying economic and political control over the canal. The U.S. loses another critical foothold in Latin America, pushing our allies further toward Beijing. In a future conflict, whether over Taiwan, the South China Sea, or something we haven't even thought of yet, China has the ability to disrupt our naval operations and global supply chains in a way we won't be able to counter quickly. This isn't just about trade, it's about power projection. Logistics win wars. If we lose easy access to the Panama Canal, we lose one of the biggest strategic advantages we've had for over a century. This is the uncomfortable truth about great power competition. Whoever controls the infrastructure controls the future. Right now, China is playing to win, and the U.S. is playing catch-up. The question is, are we willing to do what it takes to reverse that? That's where we'll leave it. Up next, the outro. Let me know if you're ready for me to proceed. Narpadavade. You said, please rewrite section 3 in its entirety, please. ChatGPT said, Section 3, the future of the canal and U.S. strategy. So, where do we go from here? The Panama Canal isn't just another piece of infrastructure. It's one of the most strategically vital waterways on the planet. It's the difference between being able to move military forces and critical supplies quickly or getting bogged down in weeks-long detours. And right now, the United States doesn't control it. China doesn't own it, but they have enough influence to cause serious problems if they wanted to. This is where we talk about options, what the U.S. can realistically do to maintain its influence over the canal and ensure it remains an asset rather than a liability in future conflicts. There are a few possible approaches here, and none of them are simple. Option 1. Reassert U.S. influence through economic and diplomatic pressure. The most obvious and least confrontational route is to strengthen U.S.-Panama relations through economic incentives and diplomatic maneuvering. Right now, China is throwing money at infrastructure projects in Panama, roads, ports, even proposed expansions to the canal itself. The U.S. could counter this by investing heavily in Panamanian infrastructure, ensuring that U.S. companies, not Chinese state-backed firms, are the ones building and maintaining key logistics hubs, offering better trade deals and economic partnerships that make Panama more dependent on the U.S. than China, using diplomatic influence to make sure Panama understands that its long-term security and prosperity are better aligned with the United States. Now, this all sounds nice, but let's be honest. China plays the long game, and they don't have to answer to Congress every time they want to spend money. The U.S., on the other hand, tends to get bogged down in bureaucracy. If we're going to counter China's economic influence in Panama, we need to act fast and think strategically. Option 2. Reestablish a U.S. military presence in Panama. For nearly a century, the U.S. military maintained a strong presence in Panama, ensuring the security of the canal and the surrounding region. That all changed when the handover happened in 1999. Today, there are no permanent U.S. bases in Panama, and that's a problem. If tensions ever escalate, whether due to Chinese influence, cartel activity, or just good old-fashioned geopolitical instability, having U.S. forces nearby would be a game changer. Re-establishing a small but permanent military presence would guarantee the security of the canal against sabotage, cyber attacks, or military threats, deter foreign interference, reminding China and any other potential adversaries that the U.S. still considers this a strategic priority. Provide rapid response capabilities in case of regional instability. Now, this option wouldn't be easy. Panama would need to agree to host U.S. forces again, and after decades of independence, they might not be eager to do so. China would obviously push back hard, using its economic leverage to convince Panama to refuse any U.S. military presence. But if Washington is serious about securing the canal for the long term, this needs to be on the table. Option 3. Counter China directly. This is the most aggressive, and probably the most controversial option. If China is actively undermining U.S. influence in the region, why not push back? This could mean blocking Chinese investments in Panamanian infrastructure, making sure that no more ports, no more roads, and no more supply chains fall under Chinese control. Using economic pressure on Panama, leveraging trade agreements, foreign aid, and other incentives to limit Chinese involvement. Strengthening U.S. alliances in Latin America to isolate China's influence in the Western Hemisphere. The problem? China doesn't take kindly to being told no. If the U.S. starts actively countering Chinese moves in Panama, expect economic retaliation, diplomatic tensions, and potential escalation in other areas, like the South China Sea or Taiwan. But here's the harsh truth. If the U.S. isn't willing to push back, China will continue to expand its influence unchecked. The risk of doing nothing. So what happens if the U.S. just sits back and lets things play out? China's grip on Panama tightens, giving them economic leverage over one of the most critical shipping lanes in the world. The U.S. loses another strategic foothold in Latin America, pushing the region further away from American influence. In the event of a future conflict, China could disrupt U.S. supply lines and military deployments by interfering with the canal. This is the uncomfortable truth about great power competition. Whoever controls the infrastructure controls the future. Right now, China is playing to win, and the U.S. is playing catch-up. The question is, are we willing to do what it takes to reverse that? So, where does this leave us? The Panama Canal is still one of the most strategically important pieces of infrastructure on the planet, and right now, the U.S. doesn't have nearly as much influence over it as it should. We built it, we ran it, and then we walked away, while China saw an opening and moved in. The reality is, this isn't just about a waterway, it's about geopolitical influence, military mobility, and economic security. The canal is a choke point, and whoever controls choke points controls the flow of power. That's been true for centuries, and it's true now. The U.S. can't afford to sit back and hope for the best, whether it's through economic incentives, a renewed military presence, or straight up pushing back against China. Something needs to be done. Otherwise, we risk waking up one day and realizing that one of our biggest strategic advantages has been completely neutralized, not by force, but by sheer neglect. Now here's my challenge to you. Don't just listen to this and move on. Pay attention to how the U.S. handles Latin America. Watch where China is investing. Ask yourself, why aren't we hearing more about this in the mainstream conversation? The reality is, while we've been distracted by the latest political drama and social media outrage, China has been making real moves in the places that actually matter. If you got value from this episode, do me a favor, like, share, and review the podcast. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these conversations going. And if you've got thoughts on this, agree, disagree, somewhere in between, hit me up. This is Full Spectrum Frontiers. I'm Bennett Tanton. See you next time.
It's just you, me, and the odds. We stuck together, we two peas in a pod. You dealt a bad hand, I'm there seizing the cards. We'll never be separated till we seeing the gods. We've been low together, high forever. Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be your light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never. And when the world gets a little too hard, wipe your eyes, put away your sorrow. When it's war, I'll be leading the charge, and I'll be still fighting for you tomorrow. Yeah, even with a blindfold or in different time zones, could find my way to you with my eyes closed. There's nothing between us. Go to Mars and Venus, stand in front of every one of them rocks they slinging and being shit. Yeah.